Hey everybody, Gabriel from Gabriel's Guitars in Tucson, Arizona and Spokane, Washington. Let's talk about soldering techniques for just a quick moment. There's just a lot of information that really doesn't apply to what we do in the guitar end of things that can really kind of complicate the information out there. I want to show you exactly what I do, what products I use. I'm not endorsed by anybody. I'm not selling you anything here. I'm just showing you what I use and how I have the greatest level of success. So the first thing you're going to need to have here is a good quality soldering iron. This is what I use. This is not an expensive soldering iron. I will tell you honestly, I don't think it really matters all that much what brand you have. What matters is the wattage, and what matters is how hot it can get. This one has a couple of nice features in that it will automatically shut off if I forgot to turn it off. It also has both a sponge as well as some of this metal material, which is great for cleaning your soldering iron. But probably the biggest mistake that people make when it comes to soldering for guitars is that they're using like a hobby level soldering iron, and it's just not going to cut it. You should be cleaning the tip, by which I mean using either one of these metallic brushes or using a sponge pad between every single thing that you solder. So both before and after using the solder, clean your tip. You'll notice this is a very well used soldering iron, and my tip is perfectly shiny right there, right? That's because I clean this thing religiously. As for what tip to use, that's sort of a matter of personal preferences. So they come with all different kinds of tips that you can get. I like using this just because it's a relatively small tip. It allows me to get into some relatively tight areas, and I just have found that useful. That said, if you have better luck with one of these types of tips or another type of tip, that's totally fine. Other things that you will need: solder. So this is what I like to use for working on guitars. This is an 8mm 2% Flux solder. The thing that I like about it mostly is the size. It's a very, very small size. It allows me to add exactly as much as I want without applying too much at one time. Paste Flux is a really, really useful tool, especially for creating like your ground circuits and things like that, where it's a little bit more difficult to get solder to stick to a piece of metal. A little tiny little bit of this goes a long way. Something else you'll want to consider is what kind of wire you want to use. I like to use 22 gauge wire. It's a little bit thicker than what a lot of people use. Oftentimes people are using 24 gauge. That's the most common wiring in electric guitars. I do not recommend going smaller than that. And what I like to use is pre-tinned wire with a latex coating. I like this stuff because it's very versatile. There are many other types of wires that are more appropriate for certain applications. For example, like cloth wire, shielded wire. These are great for specific application. I don't really like using them, and I avoid them as much as I possibly can. This is something that I use for very specific applications because it's period appropriate. Same with this. They work fine, but they're a bit of a pain to work with, and I just don't like them as much. One last tool that I am going to highly recommend to you, especially if you're doing work that isn't fresh, where you're working with components that already exist and you're having to remove or change wiring. This is called a solder sucker. You push down on this lever, and there's a button right here. You push this up against whatever pre-existing solder exists, get it nice and hot, and then you push the button, and it sucks the solder right up in there. So first thing you're gonna do when you start soldering is make sure that your temperature is up nice and high. I would say as long as you can get at least to 750, but even higher would be better, then you're okay. Before I start any soldering, I'm always going to take my tip and I'm going to clean it off. Now, when it comes time to actually solder things, the best thing you can do is prepare your surface as best as you can. I'm going to show you how to do one of these lugs on a pot first. And what I like to do is start by heating up the actual thing that I need the solder to stick to. And then I'm going to apply the solder just like this, and I'm going to fill that lug. That allows me to come in afterwards with my piece of wire, just reheat this a little bit. I can stick this through, and I'm going to touch that soldering iron to the wire itself as well. And if I need to, I can add a little bit more solder just to make sure I've got a good connection. And that's it. One of the most important things here is to allow this to dry, or allow this to cool, I should say, without it moving. You'll see now I've got a nice firm connection there. It's not going to come apart, and it looks nice and clean. I'll go ahead and show you how to use the solder sucker here as well. All I got to do is get this nice and hot, come right in over, and you'll notice it sucks right up all of the solder that I had just put down. Now, when it comes to soldering like your ground loops and things where you need to be soldering on the back of a potentiometer, this is an area that is notorious for being a little difficult to get the solder to stick to. So we want to use things that help us. So a little tiny bit of flux is all you really need. But all I'm really going to do is just get a tiny little bit of this here and just put it across the back. That is more than enough flux. You do not need much. I'm going to get the exact area that I want to have some solder on it. And I'm going to add some beading solder to the soldering iron. You notice that I'm adding it to the soldering iron, and then I'm going to leave it here for just a moment until it melts in. And that's it. You notice that what happens is when I first put it on, it's sticking to the soldering iron and not to the back of the potentiometer. But if I leave a little bit of heat there, right there, that moment, that tells me that I've got a good bead and good adhesion. And again, if I need to come in and attach a wire to that, I'm now going to just lay that basically directly on top. I'm going to let this heat up straight through. You got to be a little bit patient, and sometimes adding just a little bit of solder can help things start to move. And there you go. See, it melted right in. And it's already cooled. Okay? So a few other things that you might find useful as you kind of go through soldering and soldering techniques are going to be something like this. This is a pair of flush cut nippers. Another thing that is super duper helpful are things like this. This is a pair of hemostats. And essentially it's kind of just like a little clamp, but it's got this locking mechanism that allows you to clamp down on a wire, and it can hold something in place because things get hot sometimes. Let's not burn ourselves while working with soldering irons, okay? Something else that you might find useful, and it does come in handy oftentimes when you're having to like connect two wires, is going to be something like this. This is they sometimes call these a spider or a wire clamp, and basically it just allows you to kind of hold two things in place while you solder them in the middle, and it just makes it a lot easier so you don't have enough hands, you know? You need extra set of hands. And I guess the last thing that I just want to mention, as it's not really necessary. However, if you want things to look really, really clean and do a really awesome job with your electronics, invest in some shrink tubing. Put the shrink tubing over it, light underneath it, and it makes a nice, quick, easy, clean, beautiful looking soldering job. Where do you get all of this wonderful stuff, Gabe? That's an excellent question, let me tell you. So there is a marvelous local electronics supply store. It's a place that I've been going to for the last 20 years in Tucson, Arizona, near our other shop. It's called Elliot Electronics Supply. You can go to their website right here, elliotelectronicsupply.com. I am not endorsed with them. They don't even know that I'm making this video, but I do hope it brings them some business because they're an awesome company. They're also a fantastic place for all kinds of obscure switches, capacitors, resistors, wire, anything electronic related, generally speaking, they've got it, and they're a wonderful resource for these things. They would be happy to help you. You can also call them. They're really, really nice people. I hope you have found that very, very helpful. If you have any questions about soldering or anything like that, post them below. I'm happy to try to help and answer as many questions as I possibly can. But I appreciate you joining me for a moment here today. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.